And we've been chanting.
So welcome to day 5 of our meditation challenge for 21 days. Uh, whatever we are doing now is a bonus. You guys already have done a wonderful job of continuing for 5 days. So let's just do a quick recap of what we have done so far. We started out with how there's such an impact of sound on us. Sound impacts us in so many different ways. And we saw how sound impacted Arjuna. It led him to this first deep anguish and lamentation, and then it opened up his heart to deeper inquiry about the self.
And we talked about the yoga of lamentation and how the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita is really about acknowledging the fact that maybe we are not okay. And the fact that we are not okay is perfectly okay. And it's actually the place from which the deepest inquiries have actually begun for so many great heroes. And then we talked about the two kinds of sound, right? Material sound and spiritual sound.
And we discussed the anatomy of sound within our own body, how different sound resides in different chakras. So how the original spiritual sound enters our root chakra, then goes on to become the sound at the Manipur chakra, where we see sound as ideas and visions and things like that. Then it becomes a mental sound, and finally it comes out as a sound that we can hear. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we are analyzing sound, and yesterday we talked about...
Hare Krishna Prabhu, your music is so loud, we can't hear properly.
Thank you.
Music is loud.
Is it better now? It's completely good.
Yeah, let's just release the music during meditation.
Okay.
So we talked about anatomy of the self, how we are not this body, and we are a soul passing through this body. We talked about that. We talked about the presence of mind and intelligence, which seemed like that is us, but that is not us.
Right. We looked at the hierarchy, the body being a chariot and the 5 horses being the 5 senses, and how we're just in a state of slumber. So the purpose of meditation, the purpose of chanting these sacred sound is so that we can awaken our real self, which is buried under these different identities. And we identify with these identities, and whenever there is a death of even one of these identities or it's threatened, we go through such a state of crisis. It's a very difficult thing for us to deal with. So I guess the whole purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to, and that's what Arjuna is experiencing. He's experiencing a clash of his identities. And so Krishna is now speaking to him about his deepest self, and that's where we are. And so let's jump into it. We're going to just continue our discussion on the fact that we really have nothing to do with this external body, which is like a container. So there's a story of a fish. It's not a story, it's really like a little example of a fish which has been taken out of water. And so if you take a fish out of water and put him on a most expensive beach chair and give him, really expensive suntan oil, and bring him a bottle of Coke, and whatever, just really, really pamper him. I guess it's a rhetorical question: would the fish really be happy? And naturally, we know that the fish is not going to be happy, and it's going to continue to, really, really be very restless. So what's the, how do you make the fish again? And the solution is very simple. You just take the fish and put it back in the water, and the water is the natural nature. It's where the fish can just naturally, and so there it doesn't have any need for all the extra stuff, the non-essentials.
So the real food for the fish is water. It's none of these external things that we feed. So similarly, the real food for the self, the real self, is the spiritual sound.
The spiritual sound, and once a living entity comes in touch with this spiritual sound, then it feels completely satisfied. And then a lot of these things that we think, or we take it for granted, or we think we cannot live without, they just all fall off ourselves. Like, we realize we don't really need all of that.
Because that need is created by this material sound at different levels, bombarding us. So,
actually, that's the advertising agency, right?
Yeah, so we want to chisel away all this material sound And there's another example that is given is that who am I? Am I this body or the soul? And the example that is given is like a bird in a cage, and the bird is not the cage. It's very obvious, but when it comes to ourselves, we start thinking, I am this cage.
Somebody
And
could just keep polishing the cage.
yeah, if we just spend all our energy taking care of the body, we don't even recognize that I'm the bird inside. You don't feed the bird will die. And so just polishing we should definitely polish the cage and keep it clean. But the main thing is for the purpose of keeping the bird healthy and keeping the bird happy. So
I guess our entire modern civilization is really based around just polishing the cage. So we have a very polished civilization, but somewhere inside each one of us, there is a bird that is feeling hungry and feeling starved for love. And as a result, we're struggling in the world right now. So the Bhagavad Gita kind of takes us into this sort of very systematic understanding of all the different parts of us, so that we can distinguish between these different parts, what is what. So it is described that actually we have two coverings, the soul or the real self or pure consciousness. So let's backtrack a little bit. So it's described that we are a spark of pure consciousness. That's our eternal identity. But because of its contact with matter, there are two layers of covering on that spark of pure consciousness.
So the first layer of covering that we see, which is obvious, we can see each other through our body, that is the grossest covering. And that gross covering is called the gross body, and it's made of earth, water, fire, air, and space. And that's what we see and interact with. That gives us this identity, false identity of who we are. But lo and behold, there's another covering that the soul is covered with, which is called the subtle body, which is made from mind, intelligence, and our false ego. False ego basically means we start thinking, I am this body. And anybody who hurts us in any way, we take it very personally. That is the false ego of anybody mistreating my body or my mind. I take it personally. That is the false ego.
Right. So, so it's like kind of like having your outer clothing and your inner clothing. So the outer clothing is the gross body and the subtle body is sort of your inner clothing. And of course, the mind and the intelligence, they're subtle matters, so you can't really see them. So now the question, and then inside of all of this is the soul, right? So then the question may come up like, well, how does water and oil really mix? Where is the mixing? Because, they're both like completely made of different energies. So how do they mix? So it's described that the false ego is the glue that actually connects the soul to the gross matter, or to the gross body or the subtle body. And what is that false ego? That false ego is basically a false sense of identification with matter. So there is ahankara, means that I'm thinking I am the doer, I am matter, and that, I'm product of this material world. So that sound is actually what creates all the further sounds.
Yeah, it's like we start thinking that although we are driving the car, but we start thinking that I am the car, right? And it sounds very foolish, but that's what we believe in.
Yeah,
and that's what false ego does. It starts making us think that I am this car, I am this body, I am this mind. So we have three identities that we are dealing with, and that creates three voices within us. And the whole purpose of this meditation is to really identify our true voice, which is coming from the soul.
So one of the purposes of this meditation is to free the soul from these two unnecessary baggage or layers that it is carrying. And so, once we start meditating, the soul starts to regain its original awareness of its pure spiritual essence, and starts to separate itself from the gross body and the subtle body. And so now, as the gross body undergoes its changes and it's constantly, going through disease and death, then the soul is actually no longer affected by any of that. It's no longer in a state of fear. And also the subtle body, interestingly, the subtle body is the same subtle body. So the gross body, at the time of death, we leave it behind. But as we change different bodies in different lifetimes, the subtle body is the same that we travel with.
And that's why some people have past life memories, some people have like sudden talent that comes out, some people have fear of heights or dogs or water or claustrophobia. And so these are all things that we have experienced in previous lives that basically carries along with the subtle body. It's the same subtle body that we have for so many countless lifetimes.
So by the process of mantra meditation, we're actually dissolving the subtle body.
Yeah.
And once the subtle body is dissolved, that's a state of liberation. Now, this all may sound very technical, but it actually happens quite naturally and quite
imperceptibly.
Imperceptibly. So So it's a very, and we can see it. The way we will see it, the power or the effect of this mantra meditation that you'll see in your life is that you will see that so many things so many impressions that we have, they will start to surface up and you'll see them just kind of going away.
It's like the meditation, the mantra acts like a pick, and it starts digging into our consciousness and bringing out there's so many things, unwanted things, and then dissolving them and then going away.
And then you start to feel free.
Yeah, you start feeling light and happy. So again, Bhagavad Gita describes that the soul is basically pure consciousness, and that's everybody, for everybody, regardless of who they are. And this consciousness is right now directed through this subtle body, directed through this gross body. So it is described that we have 3 levels of consciousness. The first level is when we are awake. So that's called Jagruti. And that's when our senses are active. So like when we wake up from sleep at night, and then in the morning, our senses are active now. They can receive information and process it. So that's called the awakened state. So that's the consciousness is routed through the gross body.
And then when the consciousness is routed through the subtle body, then at that time, when we are sleeping, we are dreaming, right? So even though we are far fast asleep, so the gross body is not active at that time, but the subtle body is active. And therefore we have all kinds of thoughts and dreams and nightmares and stuff like that. So the consciousness is still awake. The consciousness hasn't slept because consciousness is eternal. So those are the two. So far we talked about the consciousness, during the waking hours and consciousness during the sleeping hours or the dreaming hours.
Yeah. And then the third level is sometimes we have this Sushupti stage where it's called deep sleep, where we don't even have dreams, we don't have any remembrance. So although we are conscious, but the consciousness has gone beyond the subtle body, and it is like very close to the soul, and that's called Susupti stage. So this is the third level of consciousness.
It's deep sleep, and that's why we feel so rejuvenated.
Yeah.
When we have a period of deep sleep, we wake up feeling so happy because it's like the closest to like a thoughtless dimension where the subtle body is no longer acting and the gross body is no longer acting. So it gives us a little bit of a peek into what a state of liberation would feel like, where we're no longer encumbered by either the gross body or the subtle body, but that state is still a material state. It's
because we still haven't experienced the nature of the soul. We have kind of out of the shadows of this material body and material mind, but still we haven't experienced the soul yet. So those are the 3 stages. So the whole process of true meditation, mantra meditation, is to turn the consciousness towards the soul, which is called the Turiya. So like you can think of the blue on the left side, where the consciousness is turned to the left towards the spiritual consciousness, spiritual realm. And so the consciousness can be thought of as a torchlight. Normal situation, we are pointing it towards the body, the mind, but we want to turn it the other way, towards the spiritual realm. And that's when we become aware of our spiritual identity. And it doesn't mean that we lose touch with this material world or we become spaced out. It doesn't mean that. It just means that we reach this awakened state where we are fully conscious of our spiritual existence.
And I think Aditi was asking this question the other day, right? That does it mean that our senses will become numb? But actually, when the consciousness is completely illuminated, then it illuminates not just the consciousness is illuminated, but it's also illuminating. So it will start illuminating on our senses, our mind, our intelligence, and we will actually have a much more refined sense of whatever we are perceiving.
So you can think of it as a bulb which is covered by, right now our consciousness is like a bulb covered by dark soot or dark paper, and nothing comes out or very little light comes out. But when, say, just imagine if that the black soot on the bulb is removed, then the full light of the bulb will come out.
I remember, I don't know if any one of you have had this experience. When I was growing up, we used to have a lot of power cuts. So we used to have these lanterns. And so you turn, and it was like oil lanterns, right? And then sometimes on those oil lanterns, you would have this black soot over the glass.
Yes.
And then you would have to clean it. And then once you clean it, then the light used to be like really nice and bright.
Yes.
You'll see in that light. So it's kind of like that. So these are some verses from the Bhagavad Gita
that deal with consciousness.
So this is one verse. That which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul.
So Krishna says, Avinashi tu tadvidi yena sarvam idam tatam vinasham avyaktasya na kaschit kartum arhasi.
O son of Bharata, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. So the same point that we were making, that it's illuminated, and it illuminates everything. So this is the power of this self, and so it behooves us, because to reclaim this nature, which is completely illuminated, and which is completely free from all fear and anxiety.
So this little spark of consciousness that we are, it has tremendous power, tremendous potential, and right now it's all covered up. So we are hardly utilizing even a tiny percent of that power that we have. So by this mantra meditation, it chisels away all the dark soot around our consciousness and brings out the full power of the self.
So with that, we will get into our mantra meditation today, where we can call out to the Supreme Consciousness, who's the source of this individual consciousness, to help us overcome these coverings of matter, which are not easy to actually overcome, because each one of those elements are so powerful, whether it's earth or it's fire. When you have forest fires, I mean, we struggle with them. With all our technological capacity, we are not able to deal with it. So each of those elements is so strong. But when we reach out to the divine source of all of these elements, including the individual self, then one can very easily cross over this great unsurmountable material energy. And that's something Krishna speaks about in the Bhagavad Gita as well. So with that, let's really call out in a deep feeling of longing and helplessness.
So we'll show you before you, if you don't have beads, then we'll show you how to use your fingers to count 108. So our hand has 5. So we'll use 4 of these fingers, and each finger has this 4 joints. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And so if you count on each finger 4 times, then through the 4 fingers we have 16, a count of 16, right? So you count up, and then you count down like this. So one full circle around 4 fingers makes it 32, and then we make it 3 times, so that makes it 96, and then we go for 3 more fingers, that's 12, so that makes it 108. So
you have a different one, I have a different one.
So yeah, let's just use this one. Yeah. So anyway, so this is how you can count on fingers. Even if you make a mistake, don't worry, this is not a counting meditation. This is just to help us.
And for those of you who might have beads, so 108 beads in here. So this is how we hold the bead, between our thumb and our middle finger. And we don't use this finger, because this finger represents the false ego or ahankar. So we keep this finger away, and so that we chant one mantra on each bead. And then we'll move the beads and move on to the next bead. So that's the practice. So let's try. And for those of you who just want to follow along, that's also fine. So however, main thing is to just try and hear the sound, and just really try to focus on the sound.
And again, pronounce the mantra clearly, and just listen to the mantra, not think of anything else, and bring the mind back to listening if your mind goes away.
Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Thank you so much for our fifth session today. So now we will just take some moments to just discuss and share. If you have anything you want to maybe reflect with the group, please feel free now.
We'll also address a couple of questions that we left
Yesterday. I
yesterday.
think Guru Shankar Prabhu is not here today. So his question we can take tomorrow. Yeah. Manishwari and Deftana are not here.
Hare Krishna, Vanita
Much.
and Alice. How are both of you?
Good,
So
thank you.
very well, thank you. So I would like to hear a little bit more about the part where you said that ahankara is the final, or this is the first noise that creates all other noise, and also how that is the one that binds the body to the. That is the part where I think I could, I mean, if you can throw a little bit more light on that. I'm not entirely sure on what you said, that ahankara is what makes the soul believe that it's the body. Is that what you said?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So
So
you can
it's
talk a little bit more about that.
right.
So the false ego is like a lens. So soul is like a bulb, and you can think of ego as like a lens. And light of the soul passes through this lens, and if like you might have done experiment in school or college, like when light passes through a convex lens, then it becomes upside down, right? It goes upside down. So similarly, when the light of the soul passes through this false ego, then everything becomes upside down, which means that instead of believing that I am this soul, we start believing that I am this body. The soul kind of goes into this um, illusory state where it starts thinking, I am this body and I am this mind. And anything happens to the body or mind, it happens to me. So just like a person who has a very expensive car and it's parked outside the house and they're inside the house having dinner or something, and then suddenly they hear a big boom, big noise outside the house, and then they immediately their heart leaps out and say, oh, maybe it's my car, somebody hit my car. And the feeling is almost like the person has been hit, not the car. Like the identification is so strong that we start identifying with the car, or somebody loses a lot of money and their identification with the money is so strong that okay, I am dead. But the feeling is it's not that you are dead, but it's just something that you are attached to that is gone.
I guess the other way to understand the false ego is through the example of a movie. Like sometimes, when you go to watch a movie in a theater, you sit in your seat and it's all dark. And at some point, a good storytelling means that you start identifying with the characters on the screen. And so you're watching on the seat perfectly fine, and you're watching, maybe the main guy getting, hit, or, maybe, whatever, somebody just lost their dearest one, and then inevitably you start crying, or you start feeling like as if it's happening to you,
or you start rooting for the hero.
So whatever it is, it's because at some point one forgot that one is just sitting on a chair watching a movie, but one actually started to identify with the characters on the screen and started to think that I am those characters, and whatever is happening to those characters is actually happening to me. So in the same way, the living entity, which is a spark of pure consciousness, is eternal, cannot be cut, cannot be wet, cannot be in any way harmed, starts to think that I'm aging, or I've been hurt, or I've been attacked, or this bad thing has happened to me. It's all because that soul in the body is now, through the medium of the false ego, has created this very strong identification that I am this body. And so the soul, so the question was that ordinarily water and oil cannot mix, but you need an emulsifier to mix the two. So the false ego is that glue that connects that pure consciousness to this gross and subtle body.
So another example is like I have a microphone and I have the computer. So now the microphone cannot talk to the computer, communicate with the computer. In order to for that to happen, I need a USB cable, right? To put one end in the microphone, put the other end in the computer, and now they can talk to each other. So that you can think of false ego is that USB cable that brings them together.
So and
But this false,
yeah,
but isn't the false ego as relevant as the main soul or whatever? Because the soul is the higher self, and false ego, what we say, ahankara, is how else would I identify? Like I'm Manjari. So for me, I cannot think that I am soul, or I'm, because I believe that soul is the God. Like that is the spiritual, the soul inside of us. Isn't that God?
Okay.
Isn't that
So
a
now,
portion of the God? So
it's
how
a
does then
portion.
one? So I tend to believe that yes, there is a God inside of me, but then this, what you're calling a false ego, that is actually as relevant as the soul inside of me, because that is what is me. That is what is Manjari, which has sometimes negative feelings, or the person who feels jealous, or who feels sad, or who has all these mortal feelings. So I tend to believe that this false ego is as relevant as the inner, the
Right.
higher soul that you talk about.
Right. So I think you're right in the sense that I think there is a false ego, but what you're referring to is actually the real ego. So there's a counterpart to that false ego, which is called the real ego. So the false ego
Okay.
thinks that this Manjari that I know is a product of matter. And so this is who I am. This material body is me. Everything connected to this material body is mine. That is an illusory condition. But when that same Manjari starts to think that I am Manjari, a part and parcel of the supreme consciousness, then that is actually being situated in true ego. And we do need that true ego because we cannot live without an ego. So ego in itself is not bad. Ego means an identity. Now within the consciousness, within the heart, there are two, actually it's described in the Upanishads that there are two birds sitting in the tree. It's not one bird. So one bird is that tiny living entity, jiva, and then there is another bird, which is the supreme jiva or the supreme bird, and they're both seated together and they're not the same.
That's the super soul. So
Oh.
when we say there is God within us, it's the super soul. But along
Okay.
with God, there is also the real self who is dependent on God in all situations, and that is the soul. And that soul is covered by false ego, intelligence, mind, and finally this gross body.
So the super soul never comes under the influence of the gross and subtle body.
Although it's staying within the body.
Even though it's staying within the body, accompanying the soul, being a companion for the soul, watching the soul cry and go through its, make its mistakes. But it's always its eternal friend. But the soul actually goes through this, and so the process of mantra meditation does two things. First of all, it relieves the living entity of this unnecessary misconception, this painful misconception, and then two, it actually reunites the tiny soul back with the supreme soul.
So it's basically turning our torchlight of the soul from instead of pointing towards the body and mind, it starts pointing it towards the super soul, and then we can establish that connection.
Thank you. That was really helpful and enlightening. Thank you so much.
Anybody else?
Anybody else?
Hello. I just have a. I'm sorry. No.
Deepa, and then go ahead, Deepa, and then Shrishti.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you so much. I first want to say thank you because this has been very useful for me. So far, I'm really enjoying it, and it's calming me down at the beginning of the day, which I think is amazing. My question, though, a little unrelated to the topic of discussion, but I've been wanting to ask it for the past 3 days, is how do you erase the fear of suffering?
Wow. How do you erase the fear of suffering?
So fear is a very intrinsic emotion that develops as soon as the soul starts thinking, I am this body. And it's a very primeval emotion that comes as a side effect of the soul identifying with the body. So to the degree we stop identifying with the body, to that degree, any kind of fear of suffering, fear of losing a loved one, fear of losing money, fear of losing reputation. There's so many fears that we have. So those fears it's not an intellectual exercise that we can just erase them, but it happens naturally when we start reclaiming our spiritual identity, and it happens gradually. That fear of anything.
Yeah, fear comes when we don't know the reality. For example, suppose in the middle of the night you wake up and you step out of your door and you see something that appears like a snake.
Or you step on a rope.
You stop, yeah, but you don't know it's a rope. You step on something and you go, oh my God, it's a snake. And then, during the morning hours when you wake up and you go outside, you realize, oh, it wasn't a snake. It was just a rope. So the reason why, there's fear is because of, this darkness or this darkness of ignorance. So when that darkness of ignorance is replaced by knowledge, and then further along, it's replaced by deep feelings of being protected and being sheltered, because all of us, none of us actually are intrinsically alone. That sense of this existential loneliness that we experience is a result of our being absorbed in the world of matter, where we do feel alone. But as soon as we turn our focus and our attention back unto the spiritual reality, we find that actually we have a constant companion.
And he's the greatest protector. He's the most powerful person we can imagine, who's always with us, right? And then there is no question of fear.
There's no question of it. Just like when a baby finally goes back to the arms of a mother, then the baby is completely protected. Then a baby is never fearful because that is a natural place for the baby. So, another example that comes to my mind is when you fly. Nowadays flying has become even a greater nightmare. But the reason why we are always in anxiety when we are in a flight, as soon as there's a little bit of turbulence, we all become anxious because that is not the natural habitat for us. We are not creatures of the sky, we are creatures of the land. And so but as soon as the plane lands, and you can almost feel the energy shift in the plane, and everybody is like, oh, we've landed. So why? Because that's our natural habitat. So when the soul finds its natural spiritual habitat, then it becomes completely free of fear. So
Thank you.
that happens through the power of chanting. You'll see it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shrishti, go ahead.
Shrishti, go ahead. Yes, Komal, thank you so much for joining. We'll see you tomorrow. Yes, go ahead.
I was just saying that this might seem very but all this information is super overwhelming and very technical if you go deep into it. So it might seem that it's very easy to understand at the superficial level, but then it's very technical and very, very deep when you actually deep dive into it and understand it. So listening to your discussion, I just have a question that how do you deal with your emotions, and specifically with your negative emotions, maybe jealousy or anger, because in our daily life we acknowledge and we have these different kind of emotions within us, all these negative emotions. So how do we deal with them, and is there anything specific in Bhagavad Gita for how to deal with these emotions?
Very nice, thank you. This is a very good question again, and you're right that the mind actually is infested with these enemies. There's anger and envy and jealousy and insecurity, all of these different things. And again, it is a result of the soul not knowing itself, the soul not having an awareness that it is complete in itself. So it's trying to find it's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, and so we are always finding or feeling inadequate. So again, it's the more we are full, more we feel abundant, the more these things, like for example, when a person is feeling very thirsty, right, and they try to satisfy that thirst by maybe drinking some soda, then that soda, instead of satisfying them, continues to make them feel more and more thirsty. So same way, when we are trying to find our validation in the material world, we actually land up feeling less and less validated. We continue to feel less. The reason why we feel all these emotions is because ultimately there is a core need in each one of us, which is a need to love and to be loved. And that need is getting continuously frustrated in the material world. Every time we try to repose these emotions of love onto anything or anybody, sooner or later there is some frustration, some disappointment, some heartbreak. And so as a result of which we become very insecure and we become very fearful. And then when we see someone else perhaps which appears or we feel that maybe someone else got it, then we start feeling envious or jealous. So these are the emotions that we deal with in this material world, which is a place of scarce resources.
Yeah, I guess the two front we can try to deal with it. One is through knowledge, and the second is through realization. So we have to wait for the realization to happen, and at the same time we also use the strength of knowledge, that when we are feeling jealous of somebody or angry towards somebody, it may happen even with the knowledge. It will happen because we are like a car going at a certain speed in a certain direction for so long, and the momentum is there. So it's a matter of reversing the direction of the car. That's what we are trying to do with this meditation.
But that's what the mantra meditation does.
That's what the mantra meditation does. So I guess knowledge really helps. The next time we become jealous of somebody, then we can tell ourselves that I am complete. I don't need, I'm not lacking anything. And I have my best friend right beside me, inside me. And this person who am I feeling jealous of, that is also a spiritual being. No matter if they are nasty to us or mean to us or whatever, but ultimately they are also a spiritual being. And we have a connection, because we have a connection to the Supreme. We are all connected to each other. So it's not like that person is different from me in that sense. We are all connected. Whatever the person is doing is also because of their own false ego, their own covering. They are just helplessly acting in that way. So kind of developing that understanding and compassion helps us to get release that anger or jealousy or whatever we are feeling towards somebody else.
Yeah, it's very powerful actually. The whole process of bhakti, in the beginning stages, is about, it's called anartha nivritti, which means giving up all these unwanted things that we carry. within us, and it happens in a very natural way.
Mm.
As the soul, as the self becomes more and more content and satisfied, then all of these extraneous things, they start to leave us, and it's a matter of experiencing it. You have to, just like you said, all of this may seem very technical, but once you start applying it, and once you start engaging in the process of hearing this transcendental sound, then there's a clearing process. It starts to clear away all of these unwanted dust from the heart, and then one starts to feel happy. And yeah, another example that comes to my mind, and this, I don't know, may help you, it did help me, is like when you get on a plane and you sit on a window seat, then you look out of the plane and you see all these houses and you see these trees, and they all look big. And then the plane starts to, take off. As it starts to take off, you peep out of the window, then those same trees and those same houses are still there, but they start appearing smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And at one point, you don't see them anymore, even though they're still there. So in the same way, as our consciousness begins to expand, and as our consciousness starts to take off and starts to become, higher and more evolved, then those same triggers that we may have in the earlier stages of our spiritual life, you will realize that those things don't trigger you anymore, because you have sort of elevated yourself beyond the lower levels of existence. So one just has to be patient and know for a fact, and hear it from those that have been practicing, that it actually works. That all of us, being in the material world means that we all have all these challenges that you're talking about, but there's a real transformation that happens of the heart as one starts to apply these spiritual practices to oneself. I hope that helps, Shrishti.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I think it says 7:53.
Okay.
I think we can end it here.
I like, Kakli, what you said. False ego can be transformed to real ego or good ego by chanting Hare Krishna over a period of time. Very nice. Thank you. So thank you, Vijay. And yes, have you met before?
No, Vijaya.
Vijaya and also Vijay. Welcome.